But nonetheless, the monetarists keep grinding forth. I think last Wednesday on CNBC they had, I'm not sure I should name names, but they had one monetarist from Chicago Bank, and he said, well, it's just a matter of time. It's obvious, it's just a matter of time. Because with double money, of course, the economy's going to come around, ultimately inflation. Not ultimate, it's just around the corner. The next night they had someone else who, actually, the other person they had was Art Laffer, who was a classmate of mine. And he and I were co-TAs for a course which actually had to do with money and inflation. Art didn't learn anything in that course, by the way. His opinions were formed before the course. I can tell you that, in trying to discuss it with him. But in any event, I'd say this is relevant because the course had to do with Latin American inflation. And he and I were co-TAs, and this is in the 70s when, in the height of, I guess they even got higher in the 80s. I'm not sure when they got, Latin America was having 1,000%, 2,000% inflation a year. And then they'd come in with a new regime, stop the spending, stop the money, put out a new currency, stop it for a little while, and then they got fiscally out of order and they had to start spending. Now, those episodes are real, but the way in which more money in those cases, even today you hear Argentina, America's like Argentina. And what they're trying to say is, and what happened in Argentina, you got to know about what was the ramrod to take the money and create the inflation. Last time, if you remember, what I was saying is that if the Fed expands its balance sheet, our mechanism is that this gives the liquidity to the commercial banks to greatly expand loans, and we as borrowers take the money, go out and buy a new car, and a lot of them, and new houses, we push prices up. And so the one way to do it, but our banking system is malfeasant right now. So the way to do it is to jump over the banks, and I called it helicopter money, and it's kind of difficult within our laws to do it, although it's been done. I mean, the helicopter drop tomorrow will be on the main plaza of the mall at 12 o'clock. And if you don't tell everyone will yell, unfair, unfair. And if you do tell them, there'll be riots. And so the way you do it within our institution is what we did a year ago last spring in 2008, where there were tax refunds. What we received were $300 a head from the Treasury, all funded by the Fed printing up the money to buy the bonds. So we do have a form of it, but it's not by literally printing money. And the whole idea of helicopter money is to get it out of the banks, over the head of the banks, into the spenders. Now, what happened in Argentina was different. What happened in Argentina, and it could happen here, I'm beginning to wonder if it's not going to happen here. I will stop way before this. I can't imagine it getting that far. What happens in a country like Argentina, the Latin American examples of the 1,000% inflation, it was not because the money got doled out of the banking system. It's not because they made helicopter drops to you and I. The way the inflation occurred, it has to happen in the goods market. Inflation is not a balance sheet item. It's the price you pay for the stuff. My watch, this Dr. Pepper. It's in goods markets, so you need more demand in goods markets. In that particular case, Argentina, most of those Latin American countries, they had a situation where the government was in a deep straits and it had to spend money. When you have to spend money, and we might end up being in the same deep straits, the first thing you do is tax. But you get up to the point where you can't tax. We're not far from that, by the way, the resistance to more tax. And, one more, what do you call it, Tea Party? I mean, when I heard that one, I knew we're at the point where we really can't go back to the tax well. Because it's becoming a focused issue with the voters. So if you can't tax you got to spend more, but you can't tax anymore, then the second way is you sell bonds. But if you get to the point where you can't sell bonds any longer, and you still have poor people that are rioting in the street, and you hear this distant sound in the background. It gets a little closer, and you start to hear, "We want food. We want food." And it gets closer and closer, and of course you call it the National Guard. "We want food." And that's basically when the governments get pressured to provide food. And they can't raise taxes and they can't sell bonds. So what they do is literally put in the hands of the Treasury Secretary, or in their case they call him the Finance Minister, they make him central bank chairman. And to pay the government's bills, literally in the goods markets, to buy the food. I'm getting some interference. I must be... I'm being censored, I think. What the governments would do would be they would literally hand over the printing press to the Secretary of the Treasury. And he would start buying food for the people who were rioting and about to take the government over. And that's how you basically get over the banking system where money really does indeed get into the income spending stream on a one-to-one basis. And indeed, that's what generates your 1,000, 2,000% inflation. Now, you might think that's Latin America and it happens there. But guess what? We had it in the United States once. You got a lot of pressing government expenditures, you can't raise taxes, and you can't sell any more bonds. That's the formula. The Civil War. In the Civil War, the Secretary of the Treasury printed money. And we didn't have currency that said Federal Reserve notes across the top of it. It said United States notes. So basically, the Secretary of the Treasury printed money. And as soon as the war was over, they regretted it. It created inflation. In other words, it looks exactly the same. And to today, you can still get them, actually. They're still in circulation. It didn't say Federal Reserve note. It said a United States note. And they actually still exist. And they're still remnants of the Civil War financing. And indeed, it was inflationary. So it does happen and can happen. And so people who get frantic about the inflation are really getting frantic about scenarios that haven't happened. Well, I can't say it hadn't happened here because it has. And it has happened in Argentina. But I certainly can't imagine that the political will stop the government and the government will have to renege on what's already on the books because the financing of it is impossible and over the top. Now, maybe that's a small reason to have faith in buying fixed income, but I do have some faith in that. Look at Social Security. We reneged about 4 or 5 times on Social Security already, and this is just the beginning. First of all, it used to start at 65. Now they push it back a year or 2 or 3 by some schedule. That's number one. Number two, here's the big one. It used to be non-taxable, tax-free. Yeah. Now it's taxable. Number three, the tax to pay for Social Security used to be capped, and now it's, I think, uncapped. I'm pretty sure they're going to uncap. In other words, any level, you pay the proportion for, I think, almost, I don't know, the cap is probably over 100,000 now, but I think they want to just raise the cap to anything. Fourth of all, it has an inflation adjustment. And we had this exercise in the United States, actually it was about 15 years ago, where they went back and redefined the inflation numbers to basically be lower so that the inflation component is less. So we've reneged on Social Security 4 times already, and we haven't even really gotten in. We still have money in the bank for Social Security. That runs out in about, 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. So there's going to be some more reneging that has to take place. And if it doesn't, I guess we go the way of Argentina, but I really just have faith in the U.S. political process that we're somehow going to figure out that we face the fact that we can't do this. But meanwhile, the inflation fears are generating cost. And the cost is higher interest rates than they would otherwise be. And all that private debt resetting is at higher rates. So that's costing us. And it's furthermore crowding out, making the cost of capital higher. So that's, on all things considered, the fear, whether rational or not, is having a cost. And we could debate at great length, and all of us have a different opinion as to whether or not, ultimately will the U.S. government back off or not. By the way, we had a major, plank in that path. Cap and trade. Not only is cap and trade important, this is energy, we'll cap the amount and then you can use and then trade your credits or whatever. Part of it's a tax. It's a $600 billion a year tax. Everyone thought it was a great energy idea, and it is. But it's also a $600 billion tax. And so we're taking another step to fund all the stuff. At some point, people will understand what it is. And even if they don't understand what it is, it'll just grind the economy to a halt. So I don't really think we're going to Argentina, but nonetheless, the market is pricing some probability of it happening, and it's paying a cost. So that's item number 6. And I don't know what number you want to put on inflation expectation fears, but they are up there. And it's putting a dent into the cost of capital. It's raising the cost of capital on top of everything else. So I don't know, you want to add 0.5%? Again, being judicious. And then, anyone have the total of the... we're up to 10. A 10% dent, thank you, in potential spending for all of these 6 reasons. And I think I'm being somewhat charitable. So we got a lot ahead and a lot to digest. Now, I guess one last question. Is there a way out of here where there is an economic growth scenario? By the way, before I do that, I want to go back to one other... It's getting late, so let me make it very quick. In this great debate that's taking place, we're going to have inflation or not, or we have solvent banks or not, really the major issue is money tight or not tight, as far as spending is concerned. And all we're getting is a lot of doctrinaire chatter. And it's not just we're going to have inflation because that's what Milton Friedman said, but we also have the other people who are, Alan, I'm not sure what to call the Ayn Rand group.
Capitalists.
Capitalists, okay. Thank you. There's a brand of capitalists who are also based really on supply and demand. They don't like, when they see the ratio of paper money to gold and to goods rise, that's a bad thing for a lot of reasons. It takes wealth away. So there is that other group as well. So you do have a lot of resistance to all this. But to me, the real issue is not these doctrinaire issues, or what does the Fed balance sheet mean? To me, the question is, as to you and I as a spender, can we go out and borrow the money and spend? I.e., is credit tight right now? Is it facilitating economic activity or is it contracting economic activity? Despite the Fed's $1 trillion they threw into it, it's still very, very tight because our banks are insolvent and we can't get a way to make them solvent. So right now, I'm not fearful of inflation. I'm more concerned about the tightness of credit. And I don't care about these doctrinaire discussions except they're causing damage. And, they certainly have the right to be concerned, and there's good reason to be concerned. But the point is, right now, despite being in Quad 3, we got tight money. And tight money keeps you in Quad 3. And that's the bottom line on that. I don't care what the ratios are, the balance sheets are, how much of the Fed expansion of credit was funded with dollars versus borrowing. By the way, one last point on that. I hope it's one. There is another form of debt the Fed can rely on to soak up the money. And this is totally new, and it's in the Alan Greenspan short article, and something I picked up actually at a Fed conference about 2 years ago from the vice chairman of the Fed, who kind of whispered in my ear that, one way we're going to take care of this, if we have to, is to sell Fed bonds. If you sell Fed bonds, this is non-interest-bearing Fed debt, and sell it for interest-bearing Fed debt and takes the currency back. And it doesn't qualify as reserves, and so it keeps the money expansion under control. And the Fed has not yet gotten congressional authority, but they did get congressional authority in the TARP bill to pay interest on demand deposits. They never on the member bank reserve deposits. They never had authority before to sell debt and pay interest. So they went part of the way, Congress, and gave it to banks only you can sell debt to.